What's up, guys? This is not something I've really done before. Kind of posting my opinions on the internet, vlogging, if that's what you would call this. I don't know. But yeah, I did want to do this because it's something that has to do with something that means a lot to me, which is the show How I Met Your Mother, and specifically the finale. Now, I know there's been a lot of uproar about this finale, but I kind of just wanted to get my 2 cents out there. So before we get into anything, yes, there will be spoilers. If you have not seen the finale, you probably shouldn't watch this. I'm literally going to be talking about it. So, with that being said, hopefully this isn't too painful for you guys to listen to me. I am kind of getting over a cold, but I did just have one of those blue cough drops, and got some water here. So I'll do my best to edit out any parts where I'm choking to death. No, just to be considerate. So, a little bit about my finale watching experience. I watched it when it aired on Monday night. I guess last Monday, if it's going to be Monday now. I don't know. So anyway, I watched it. And then I proceeded to sit on this couch for the next almost 2 hours, just kind of staring into space and kind of contemplating everything that I just saw. Trying to wrap my head around the finale and the fact that one of my favorite shows is over. So after those 2 hours, I ended up going online and watching it again, just to kind of reassure myself, kind of come to some conclusions about the episode. And I did watch it a third time before I went to bed that night, just for good measure. But yeah, just kicked the table there. After I watched it the second time, I ended up going onto the How I Met Your Mother subreddit just to see, what people were saying about it. I figured there'd be a lot of confusion. There'd be some people upset. I was not expecting the resounding amount of hatred, I guess you could say, towards it. That did kind of take me by surprise. But, reading through some of the comments, I definitely understood where people were coming from. There's definitely some issues, some things that could have been done better. But a lot of what I was seeing, a lot of the complaints, I kind of read, and I was kind of like, you know what? I didn't really take it that way. That's not how I interpreted it or thought about it. So that's kind of what motivated me to make this video. And yeah. So right off the bat, I want to make this clear. I'm not making this video to tell you that if you disliked the finale, then you're wrong. I'm not saying you should like it and here's why, and that I'm right and my opinion's better than yours, because I definitely get it. I definitely see other people's points of views. There were definitely things that could have been done better, honestly. But for the most part, I thought some of the things that I kind of thought about the finale might be worth sharing. I will say that this show has meant a lot to me, over its airtime, for some different reasons. Big part of it's just the fact that a lot of the themes and things that went on in this show I could really relate to. So because of that, it makes sense that I might have taken something a different way or might have interpreted it another way. And I thought that would be worth sharing. Again, I'm not telling you that if you saw it one way, then you're wrong and that you shouldn't dislike it if you did dislike it. But I was hoping, just to make this video, get my thoughts out there, maybe offer kind of a different point of view, a different explanation on things. And, if it changes your mind about anything, then that's great. Glad I could help. But I'm not really expecting it to. And if nothing else, maybe what I have to say about it could help give you some closure. If, you weren't sure what to think or had mixed emotions on it. So, yeah. So, let me, get into my overall opinion on the finale. And when talking about this, I think it's kind of important to make a distinction. And I think this distinction is kind of maybe what people are getting mixed emotions from, and maybe if they could just kind of separate these two things, it might help them come to terms with the finale a little bit better. So first, I will say looking at the finale as just an episode, like just a standalone episode, not really taking anything else into account. No, I don't think it was that good. That's where I can see what a lot of people say, how it was rushed. They kind of crammed a lot of things into a little bit of time. So, in other words, if my friend was going to get into the show and ask me to show him some good episodes, this one would not be on that list. But looking at it as more than just one single episode, looking at it as, the finale, the end of the entire show, then I do actually think it was a pretty perfect ending for the show. And I know I'm definitely in the minority at that. Please, don't hate me too much. Please at least hear me out before you go downvoting me and saying that I'm stupid and, all that stuff. So yeah, I did think it was a good ending for the show. I thought it did wrap up things and kind of tie up loose ends pretty nicely. I know a lot of people were upset kind of just about the ending in general, which I guess I'll talk about first. And when I say the ending, I mean like the last few minutes with the whole Ted and Tracy and Robin thing. So a lot of people didn't like the ending. There were the people that just didn't like the whole Ted and Robin thing. Then there were the people that didn't like the whole mother dying thing. Then there were the people that liked that alternate ending on YouTube, which is literally just the ending of the show with the Ted and Robin thing ends the mother dying cutout. Same exact ending, just missing those two scenes. And I guess that's okay, if you're a 7-year-old girl who likes her fairy tales and hearts and stars and horseshoes and red balloons. I'm kidding. I do not mean that. I understand. Some people just wanted that happy ending. As for me, like if we got that kind of just perfect happy ending, I would have kind of felt cheated, coming from this show that has just kind of given us a lot of different emotions. I thought that if we got a simple happy ending like that, it just would not have lived up to my expectations. And I know one of the arguments for that is that it should have a happy ending because the show is a sitcom. And I'm not going to lie, like that hurts a little bit. Because I know I'm not the only one who really loved the show and really got emotionally attached to it. And I think for all the people who were as attached as I was, they'll agree that this show was a lot more than just a sitcom. It just the fact that we had such a connection with it. If you say sitcom, I think of something like The Big Bang Theory. And if you think about that, like if Sheldon and Amy were to break up at this point in the show, would that leave you emotionally devastated? I mean, me personally, I would not care at all. Not bashing you if you would, but I'm just saying I feel like for the majority, if like they were to break up after however many seasons they've been together, as opposed to the very first season of How I Met Your Mother, when Lily and Marshall broke up, I'm willing to bet that you felt a lot more when they broke up, despite only knowing the characters for one season, than you would if any of the Big Bang couples were to break up after however long they've been together. Again, could be wrong, but that's just the impression that I get, simply because, again, How I Met Your Mother was just more than a sitcom. Like, it was, I don't know what it would be, but I don't know. Getting back on topic, if they just gave us that ending, like the mother didn't die and that's it, I would have not been satisfied with that ending. A lot of people are throwing around the term cop-out to describe the ending that we did get. They're saying it was lazy, and that kind of confuses me just because I feel like if we got that ending, where it's just like, okay, that's How I Met Your Mother, the end. Like, everyone's happily ever after. That I felt would have been more of a cop out. Like that seems a lot lazier to me. Them not trying to tie up any loose ends or anything, just leading the whole thing up to where they met the mother, and then that's it. They're done. Nothing else. No more of the story. I would have thought we would deserve more than that. Again, not bashing you if you wanted that happy ending. That just would not have been for me. As far as the mother dying, first of all, I'm actually curious as to how many people did not expect that, because there were definitely hints in earlier episodes, and there was a lot of speculation that that might have been the case. So yeah, looking back at some of the other episodes, there were definitely hints, two pretty major ones coming from this season, the last season, in Vesuvius. The ending where Ted and Tracy were eating dinner, and he's talking about how it was nice because Robin's mother came to the wedding. Tracy says, oh, well, what kind of mother would miss their daughter's own wedding? And then Ted starts to tear up and gets very emotional. And actually, when I first saw that, I kind of overlooked it. I was like, oh, well, I guess Ted's mother passed away, so she couldn't make it to their wedding. And then it was actually my roommate that pointed out that he thought that meant the mother was not going to be at their kid's wedding. And then after hearing that, I thought back to, I think it was season 8 in the episode The Time Travelers. And if you don't remember that one, I remember watching that with someone, and after it was over, they were like really confused and like, oh, that was stupid, and they didn't really get it. I was confused also. I actually went back and rewatched the episode later that night just to try and figure out what was going on. And if you don't know what I'm referencing to, that's the episode where Ted was at the bar by himself with 2 tickets to wrestle Robots vs. Wrestlers. I was going to say WrestleMania. But, and then at the end, he ends up leaving the bar, going to the wrestling match, and he's telling his kids that's what he ended up doing. But if he had known, then he wouldn't have done that, and he would have went to the mother's room or wherever she was living, and he gave that speech that was like, hi, you don't know me, but we're going to meet in 45 days and we're going to fall in love. But I'm here now because I want those extra 45 days with you. And I remember watching that scene and like feeling things. And I didn't know what or why I was feeling them. But I remember watching him give that speech. And I was like, that means something. I don't know what it means, but it definitely means something. So then, after watching the Vesuvius episode and then relating it back to that, I thought it was kind of obvious that that's where they were going with it, that the mother was going to end up, having died or passed away or something. And yes, I do know that there's a difference between the mother dying and then the way her death was portrayed in the show. I know there's a difference, and I will get to that. But as far as the mother dying, yeah, there were definitely hints kind of easing us into it. And I did kind of think it made sense, when we think about it. Just because if the mother was still alive, what's the motivation for Ted telling these kids his story? It's like, okay, kids, your mother's out grocery shopping, so sit down on the couch and let me spend the next couple hours telling you in excruciating detail how I met your mother. And then what? The story ends. The mother comes home and she's like, guess what, kids? We are having hot dogs for dinner. I don't know. If it ended up as Ted was just telling the kids the story for no real reason, like he didn't have any motivation for telling it other than just telling it, I kind of would have felt bad. Almost felt like that tarnished the show in a way. Just taking away that motivation for Ted to tell the story in the beginning, I don't know, I just really felt like the show would have been missing a lot of depth if there was no motivation behind it. So, kind of my thoughts on that. And as far as the Ted and Robin thing, there's a lot of different ways I could take this conversation talking about Ted and Robin. Obviously, that's a pretty big theme. But I think I'm going to get into more detail on that towards the end. But I will say, like, there were people that were saying they would have been happy or they could have accepted the mother dying and then didn't like the whole Ted and Robin thing. And, like, is that really the ending that you would want? Is, he tells the story, we find out that the mother's dead, and then that's the end? Like, Ted doesn't find happiness again. He just goes to the rest of his life lonely by himself. Like, we spend the whole 9 seasons rooting for Ted, waiting him to find his perfect girl, to be happy. And then the show ends. Obviously, the wife's died, so he's going to be very depressed. And then that's where you want the show to end? I don't know. That would kind of be my gripe with that kind of ending. I don't know if that would have been better than the happily ever after ending. I probably would have liked that ending better, honestly. But I'm just not a big fan of fairy tale happy endings. Especially because this show kind of dealt with a lot of very real things. So I just thought it made sense to kind of have more of a realistic ending. And I know, you guys can argue that point. Again, these are kind of just my interpretations of it. So yeah, that's pretty much what people have been upset about ending-wise. I guess I can kind of start talking about some of the overall arguments of the ending. But I'll start off with one of my favorite ones. Some people are using the argument that the show is called How I Met Your Mother and not something like How I Met Your Aunt Robin. And when I see those arguments, it's like, really? That's the best you can come up with? The Big Bang Theory doesn't have anything to do with them proving the theory of the Big Bang. Am I going to, write a petition to the producers to rewrite the whole show? That's pretty ridiculous. The title does not have to be taken literally. And if we were going to use that argument, we could also say the show is not called How I Met and Lived With and Spent Time With Your Mother. For the people saying that it should have been more about the mother, but I'll touch on that stuff later. So yes, the show was called How I Met Your Mother, and it's not like it lied. I mean, did you see the part where Ted saw the mother at the wedding? And were you watching when he talked to her at the train station? So it's not like the title was a total lie. The story was about how he met the mother. At least that's what his story was to his kids. Ted's story just happened to not end there. So yeah, I don't think people are really using that as like a legitimate arguing point, kind of just throwing that out there. At least I hope not. So I kind of want to start getting into some of the criticisms of the actual finale now. A big one that people are mentioning is about the Barney Robin divorce. And again, I get there's a difference between the divorce and then the time spent on the divorce. I'll get to that. But as far as the divorce, a lot of people were very upset that they spent, the whole 9th season driving home the Barney and Robin point at their wedding. And then within 15 minutes of the last episode, they're divorced. Now, as far as that's concerned, yes, that is a valid point that they're trying to drive the Barney Robin thing just so that way they could kind of have their twist in the end. I will say I don't think I'm alone in this, but I never really bought the Barney Robin thing, even up through the wedding. Like, I was kind of just going to accept it, but I wouldn't have been happy with it. As far as spending the whole season on it, there's kind of a couple different reasons that they would, at least the way I see it. So first of all, the fact that they spent this whole season on that one weekend, the 48 hours of the wedding or whatever it was, the way I see it, it was kind of like the How I Met Your Mother abridged version. Like, if you think about it, if you're telling someone the story of how you actually met someone, say you met a friend in college or something, and you're telling the story of how you guys met, you wouldn't start back in high school. No, you would not go through the classes you took that made you pick the major that you did, and then the college acceptances, which made you pick that college. Like, you would probably say, I met him in college. And maybe there'd be a story to that. Maybe you'd be like, well, my roommate freshman year was part of this club and he invited me to a meeting, and then I met my friend at that meeting. But the point is, like, you'd probably start your story at the actual place that you met that person. Just like if you were Ted and you met someone at a wedding, you'd say, yeah, I met them at this wedding. And maybe you'd retrace the events of the wedding. But essentially, like, that's the story. So the way I see it, this season was not really about the Barney Robin wedding itself. Like, I didn't think the wedding was the main focus. I did see it as, the 48 hours, whatever, leading up to the point where Ted met Tracy. So also a big point of this season was kind of some of the other storylines going on during the wedding. Obviously there was Ted and then there was Robin and Barney. But there was a pretty big fight between Lily and Marshall. Like, I think they were fighting for probably at least half the season in what, I'm pretty sure was the worst fight we've ever seen them have. I might be wrong, maybe I'm forgetting something, but I'm pretty sure that's like the worst fight we've seen them get in. And I think it was kind of important that they spend time on that, just because we saw some of the things that they were fighting about kind of had to do with honesty. It was the whole Marshall didn't tell Lily about being a judge, and then Lily was apparently pregnant, so she didn't tell Marshall about that, and then they got into that whole fight. And I actually thought that fight was kind of important because not only did it show that, Lily and Marshall, which I'm pretty sure the majority of people see as like this perfect couple, it shows, that they fight. They're the perfect couple, they're married, and they still have to make compromises and sacrifices for each other, as well as try and be as honest as possible. So it kind of showed that, and I think it's kind of interesting. Again, a lot of this stuff I'm talking about might be speculation. Of course, I overanalyzed it a lot. I said that. But as far as their fight, I think it was kind of an important thing to note that we saw, the way Marshall ended up giving up being a judge so that they could go to Italy for Lily. And then they ended up coming back from Italy so that Marshall could hopefully be a judge again. It shows that those kind of relationships take sacrifices. And then I think that kind of played off, the wedding, knowing that Barney and Robin aren't really the kind of people that will make sacrifices. And that's kind of obvious in the point where I think Robin wanted to have the wedding in Canada, or maybe the reception or something. And like Barney was not willing to make that sacrifice. He had a nice romantic gesture with the whole wedding dinner thing. But as Robin later pointed out in the second to last episode, that was one of the most romantic things he did for her, and it was based on a lie. Which, as we kind of saw from the Lily Marshall thing, you cannot be lying in a relationship. You can't build a relationship on lying. It's got to be about honesty. So, maybe I'm looking into that. But I thought that was kind of a good point to make, to kind of give us the idea that Barney and Robin probably weren't going to work out because they weren't really capable of doing the things that Lily and Marshall were able to do to keep the relationship working. The kind of deeper meaning, I thought, to this whole season, again, I don't think it was really about the wedding as much as it's about the point in time where Ted is finally able to become the person that he needs to be to meet the mother. And, that's kind of thrown around a lot, but it kind of makes sense. This whole last season, the whole weekends, those couple hours leading up to the wedding, all the little events that happened kind of played in a part where it allowed Ted to actually let Robin go. And yes, I know you're thinking, if that's where he let her go, then why would he come back to her? And I think it's a very important point to make. It's a pretty simple idea that letting someone go and not loving someone anymore are two completely different things. So when you think about it that way, you can kind of apply it, to both Ted and Robin, as well as Ted and Tracy too. That theme kind of makes sense there. So with that being said, this season kind of built it up so that Ted was finally able to let go of Robin when the time came, because of the fact, that Barney and Robin were, two of his closest friends, and they're getting married. So obviously he had to let Robin go, knowing that he couldn't be responsible for breaking them apart because he wouldn't want to do that to his friends. By doing that, that actually makes him emotionally available to meet the mother. Now, a lot of people kind of argue the point that the show is not so much how Ted met the mother as much as it is what needed to happen for Ted to become the person that he needed to be to meet the mother. And that I've kind of seen that floating around in different arguments. I don't know if that's actually ever explicitly said, but I think that's a good point. Because if Ted is not able to let Robin go, then, who's to say that he actually would have talked to the mother? Because we know Robin has pretty much held him back in almost all the other relationships he's had. I think Victoria is the main example. But if he wasn't able to actually let Robin go, he might have seen the mother at the train station and been like, yeah, she's pretty, but she's not Robin, and I'm moving to Chicago tomorrow anyway, so then he might not have talked to her. So obviously it's important that he was able to let Robin go at the point when he did for all of that to happen. And I'm not debating the fact that they did kind of drag out this season. Apparently, Jason Segel was not around for the first half, which is why they had some of those weird driving scenes. And I'm not really defending this season. I thought this kind of second half of it was pretty good. Better than the majority of season 6, 7, and 8, I thought. And, there were stupid filler episodes, just like pretty much every other TV show. This argument's not really about the whole season. Just kind of talking about the finale, so yeah. So that's kind of what I took on the season being dragged out the way it was. Let's kind of talk about the divorce now, because there were a lot of people that were actually upset by the Barney-Robin divorce. Not a whole lot, but there were definitely people that brought this up that wanted Barney and Robin to be together. They thought they were good together. First of all, I think there's people that think kind of the way the divorce happened, because yes, it was kind of quick, but I think there are people that actually think that they just had them divorce for the sole purpose of being able to have Ted and Robin get back together. I think there's people that actually think that they built up the whole season, had Barney and Robin get married, and then because they filmed the ending, final scene in the finale, they filmed sometime during the second season. So I think a lot of people actually think that because they had that ending planned pretty much from the beginning, that they spent all this time getting Barney and Robin together, and then the last episode they were like, oh well crap, how are we going to use that ending if Barney and Robin are married? Well, let's make them get divorced. And I think that's really what some people actually think have happened, and that's just kind of ridiculous. I don't really know how to justify that, but that's yes, because they got a divorce that allowed Ted and Robin to be together. But I think it's kind of shallow to think that the sole purpose they made him get divorced was to have that ending. I don't think I'm alone in this, but like I said before, I really never bought Robin and Barney as a couple. And when we found out that they were getting a divorce, I was actually very relieved. I was very happy that they said that. I was actually worried because they said they were divorced. Then it went to commercial break, and I was like, please don't come back from commercial and have them be like, just kidding, or we're actually pregnant or something, despite the fact that Robin couldn't have kids. They maybe could have said they were adopting or something. I don't know. Like, that would have upset me if they joked about that. But I was very happy that they actually ended up getting divorced because I really did not think they were a good couple, especially in the beginning. Like, they felt very forced to me. And I know a lot of people are saying that they were good together just because they had a lot in common. But as far as what they had in common, like, they both thought that they were awesome, and they were both scared of commitment. And, like, how are you supposed to build a relationship on those things? Like, it's kind of destined to fall apart from the beginning, I felt like. And yes, I was kind of, throughout the whole 9th season, kind of coming to terms with the fact, like, okay, they were getting married. But if the show were to end and just leave it as Barney and Robin staying together, I would have that would not have sat easy with me, because I would have never got it out of my head that they were not that good for each other. Or maybe they were good for each other, but not good with each other. I don't know. So as far as that, I was happy to see that they got a divorce. Again, like, I kind of saw it coming, or kind of thought it would have had to happen that way at some point. So I don't know how many people are actually upset with the divorce itself as they are the fact that it kind of happened very quickly. And like, I already gave my thoughts on the whole build-up of the 9th season. As far as the abruptness in the show, I feel like it actually kind of makes sense. First of all, looking at it from the point of view of the canon of the show, which is the fact that Ted is telling his kids the story, which is something I feel like people need to kind of consider throughout the whole thing, because I feel like during this last episode, they did really kind of stick to the canon thing. So thinking about it from that perspective, presumably after the wedding, Ted met the mother, so he was spending a lot of time with her. Barney and Robin went on their honeymoon, and then as we know, Robin was traveling a lot for her job. So Ted would not have seen them a lot anyway, and we get told that, the gang is not together as much as they used to be. But we also know that when Barney and Robin have trouble in their relationship, when they're fighting, they really don't advertise that. So it makes a lot of sense that, when Robin is traveling for her work and Barney's going with her, even if they are fighting, like, Ted would have no way to know about it, because they're not going to call him up and be like, oh, we're having problems. So it kind of makes sense that in his story, he wouldn't really be able to elaborate on it. And at the same time, it's not like they didn't give us details, because they did show us that one scene in the hotel room where Barney wasn't happy because they were always traveling, and that was kind of putting pressure on their relationship. Robin wasn't happy because she was kind of trying to focus on work and Barney at the same time, and it just wasn't working. So we know that they were both unhappy, and really that's all it takes. Like, that's all you would need in order to end a relationship. It happened kind of fast, but that's just what happens. And of course I could speculate even further. There's really no proof on this, but maybe part of the divorce could have happened because Robin might have had some kind of resurfacing feelings. Again, no way to prove that. That's just something you could throw in there. But yeah, like, they were unhappy, and that kind of makes sense, tying along with the fact that I didn't think they worked well to begin with. So yeah, the whole divorce thing kind of made sense to me. But I think the biggest argument coming out of the whole divorce thing, and kind of in regards to the whole finale itself, is the theme that, or the idea that the character arc kind of got destroyed. A lot of people were throwing around the word regression, and like, this is a pretty big argument that people are saying. They said, there was all this character development, and then they destroyed it in this last episode. But that's really not how I saw it. People are saying regression, and if you're gonna go with regression, think about it this way. Barney and Robin tried to do something that they were both very scared of especially when the show first started, like back in season 1. Like, commitment was something that they really never saw themselves doing, or at least at that point in time, they were not ready for it. But at this point in time, they tried it. And they had a marriage, and it failed. It's like, you put all that time and effort into something that doesn't work out. Wouldn't it make sense that you would kind of go back to your old ways? You would kind of go back to what's comfortable and familiar for you? You know, the way you were before you were in that relationship? So think about it that way. I don't think it's that far-fetched that, you know, after the marriage fell apart, Robin would get absorbed in work again, and Barney would go back to, you know, all the stuff that Barney does. I still don't see it as a regression. I don't see it as like they became these people that were ready for a committed relationship. They were ready for marriage, and now they're not anymore. I saw it kind of the whole thing as a continuing growth in their characters, where you have these people that were not ready for any kind of commitment who are now at the point where they're willing to try it. And I feel like that's their character development. You know, we see as the show goes on, both Barney and Robin kind of open themselves up for more meaningful relationships. Barney actually has an engagement before Robin, which ends up ending because when they're signing the prenup papers, they realize they don't trust each other. And as we learned from Lily and Marshall in this past season, you can't build a relationship on, you know, lies and dishonesty. Like, trust has to be there. So that fell apart, and then it kind of makes sense that, you know, slowly Robin and Barney are opening each other up to the idea of a relationship. And I think the whole point of their characters was not that they were ready for one, but that they were mature enough to actually try out marriage. Like, even though they were scared of it for so long, they actually gave it a try. And I think that kind of is what defines their characters. At least that's the way I see it. Not that they were necessarily ready for marriage, but that they're mature enough at a point in their life where they were willing to try it. And they gave it an honest effort. It's pretty obvious that they did love each other. You know, I'm not going to argue that point. Like, they definitely cared for each other, and the marriage just didn't work out. So I don't see that as a regression. I see it as, you know, they were who they were. They tried to be something that turns out they weren't, and then it makes sense that they would go back to being who they were. And if you need any more evidence of this, I think two of the quotes that Barney says in the one bar scene where we find out Marshall became a judge, I think two of those quotes kind of say a lot. The one, of course, he goes to hit on the girls, and Lily's kind of choking him, and he's like, you know, this is me. Can I please just be me? So at this point, like, he's accepted the fact that that's who he is, that he can't really have a meaningful relationship that's just not part of him. And then the other quote that I think he says before that is the one where he says, if it's not going to happen with Robin, it's not going to happen with anyone. And I think that quote actually speaks volumes about Barney's character, because it shows that, you know, he did really love Robin, and he opened himself up to her, and he gave the marriage thing an honest try, and it just didn't work out. And then actually he did a very mature thing that we saw in the hotel room, where they were talking about ending it, and he sat her down and he said, you know, I love you, and I promise to always be honest. So the fact that he was able to be honest about that, I feel, just supports the fact that his character has grown. You know, I don't think any part of that is destroying his character development. Even if he went back to his old ways, like I said, after failing a marriage, it would kind of make sense. So yeah, I think those couple of quotes kind of sum it up as far as Barney's character developing. Again, like, he wasn't ready for marriage. He was ready to give it a try, but it turns out that that's not what he was looking for. So again, after all that, I don't think their characters regressed. I don't think their development, was completely turned around. I think it shows that from the beginning they have been developing, and even through the marriage, I think like their characters have still continued to develop to the point where they actually know that that marriage didn't work. They gave it a try, and now at least Barney can kind of accept that and move on. So yeah, that's what I think about that. Again, that's just kind of how I saw it, my interpretation of the whole thing, the whole character development thing that people are complaining about. So, I don't know, hopefully that makes sense to you guys. If it doesn't, and at any point, like if you have questions or need me to clarify on something, feel free to let me know and I'll definitely respond to anything. But now I kind of want to talk about some of the things I just liked about the episode, some of the scenes. Nothing that people were complaining about, but just things that I liked. I think it's definitely worth saying, say what you want about this finale, but Marshall's character was flawless in this episode. Just with everything, the whole Judge Fudge and Fudge Supreme thing, it was great. When he's talking about his job and he's saying, much of what I do doesn't make me cry. It was just like I thought he was absolutely perfect in this whole episode. And especially in that last scene, I actually saw some people complaining about this, but in the last scene when they're at McLaren's and he turns around to those kids, because obviously he's just feeling a lot of stuff, and he goes to them, do you guys have any idea what happened in this very bar? And they're like, no. And he just says just all kinds of stuff. Like, some people were actually disappointed because they thought he was going to come out with some, like, big elegant speech or some big, or something meaningful. I don't know what people were expecting, but personally, I thought that line was perfect. Because there's really no way to be able to explain everything that's happened. How do you find the words to do that in the first place? And even if you could find the words, there's no way to really convey that meaning. And, I think at that point, that's kind of what Marshall saw, which is why he ended up saying just all kinds of things. And I think that was a great line. I think it was very, very true to kind of his character. And just big props to Jason Segel as an actor for kind of being able to convey that emotion. So, yeah, Marshall, I thought really killed it the last episode. That was just very awesome. Another scene that I really liked was at the Halloween party. First of all, thought the Cockamouse little cameo thing was pretty cool. But also at the Halloween party, first of all, the whole Lily whale costume I thought was kind of weird. But it was actually pointed out in another comment I read that it was actually almost symbolic the way Marshall was Ahab and Lily was the whale, because the story of Ahab, or the point of the story of Ahab, is that Ahab was defined by his pursuit of the whale. And that's actually one of the recurring themes in How I Met Your Mother, the fact that it's not so much the destination as it is the ride. And I think that's actually a quote in the one Super Bowl episode where he says, just because you know the ending doesn't mean you can't enjoy the ride or something. So that's kind of a recurring theme that they have going on that I thought was pretty cool. Back to the Halloween party itself, the one scene that I really enjoyed, and probably I think the only part where I teared up a little during the finale, was when they had the flashback. Robin sees Ted on the roof, and they had that flashback to season 1, the end of the Slutty Pumpkin episode where Ted and Robin are on the roof after the Halloween party. And that's actually, I was really happy because that's probably one of my favorite scenes from the entire series. I don't know why, but it is. So it made me really happy to see that they kind of flashed back to that one scene. The other kind of scene thing that happened during the finale, we talked about some of the stuff in the beginning, the divorce happens, and then some of that stuff in the middle. And then there was the robots versus wrestlers scene where we kind of find out what's going on with Barney. I will say some of the banter during the robots and wrestlers scene was some of the best, I think, out of all the characters that we've gotten in a while. But as far as Barney goes and the as far as the way Barney, his character was kind of wrapped up, I don't think there's a lot of people complaining about this, but I thought it was the perfect way to kind of end Barney's character with him having a kid. I thought the way he announced it was a little weird. Kind of just the fact that it was a one-night stand and he got the girl pregnant. But at the same time, it makes sense. And, they left the girl's name at number 31. Some people kind of wanted more of an explanation, I think. But at the same time, we also have characters throughout the show called Blah Blah and Honey. So it's not totally unrealistic to think that they would just leave a character as number 31. I also heard talk that, or I guess rumors, that number 31 was going to be the basis for the How I Met Your Father spinoff or whatever, which, for the record, I'm not too excited about that. I'm not getting my hopes up that much. But yeah, the lack of detail of that didn't really bother me that much. Some of the things I kind of wanted to know more of. We know Barney got the baby and became a father, but, did he get full custody? Is it a split custody? Like, what's going on with that? During the hospital scene, is the mother, did she leave the room already? Or was she just on the bed out of the camera view and they just didn't acknowledge each other? So some of those things were actually some of the things I thought maybe they could have elaborated on a little more. But at the same time, it's really not a big deal. Because the point is, Barney had a kid of his own, and that just completely changed his persona. That made him see girls in a totally different way, as we saw by the one scene where he's telling them to go home and get dressed and call their parents. And again, I don't think a lot of people are really arguing that Barney having a kid is the perfect ending for Barney's character. Because as we've seen, he's always been good around kids. He's always really enjoyed kids. And he was just never one to really fall in love and commit to another person. Or at least another woman romantically, I guess. Or, you know what I mean. You know what I'm talking about. And this is supported by the fact that he did care about Robin and he gave it a try and it just didn't work. So we know his character would never be suited to be in a relationship, and I'm glad they didn't try and end it with him finding someone like that. Instead, he ended up having a daughter, which is perfect, and yeah, there's not much more to say about that. So again, I thought the way Barney's character wrapped up was perfect. As far as other characters, we have Lily and Marshall, and we know that Marshall ended up sacrificing his judgeship so that Lily could go to Italy and do her art thing. And they were there for a while, and then Lily eventually gave up her art thing so that they could come back. And Marshall, again, kind of making the sacrifice, being in a kind of a dead-end lawyer job or whatever he was doing, until he ended up getting his judgeship. So it just kind of showed idea that relationships are about sacrifice and compromise and trust. And we know that they ended up being happy anyway. Marshall ends up getting the judgeship, getting his Supreme Court thing. Is that what he was going for? I think so. We know they stay together, and that's kind of their happy ending. So I think, that was great for them. And then the last three characters left, of course, are Ted, Robin, and Tracy. Now, because Ted and Robin are kind of the ones causing the most outlash, I'll kind of save them for the end. So we can talk about Tracy for a little bit. First of all, just as a character, Tracy is really interesting because of the fact that she was really only in a few episodes. And yet, the fan base seems so attached to her. And we feel like we know her so well, despite her having very limited actual screen time. So that's really unique for a character in any TV show. I really don't know an example of another character like that, where so much of her we determined by just Ted's stories of her and the way she was explained, and then from what little we did see of her and saw her and Ted being perfect together, being this cute little couple, and we kind of based our ideas around that. So a lot of people were very upset, not just because she died, and not just because she died in a kind of abrupt manner on screen, but they just wanted more time with her in general. And, while it would have been nice, of course, we would have loved to see more stories, kind of just more time with the gang in general. It makes sense that we would want more time with Ted and the mother, just kind of see their whole story because, yes, this whole time we were led up waiting to find Ted's perfect woman. No, they finally meet, and all we really get are kind of short tidbits of them being happy together. But in a way, kind of makes sense. First of all, you can go back to the fact that Ted is telling the story, and obviously his kids know about a lot of the time they were together. Since, as we know, they ended up having their first kid before they got married. I don't remember the timelines super clearly, but I think it was before they'd been together for 5 years. Or maybe it was at the 5-year mark or something. I don't really remember. But, it kind of makes sense regarding the story. What I think I've kind of concluded in my head anyway, and what I've seen other people say that actually makes sense, is the way we felt about the mother, the way we liked her so much and saw her really as the perfect woman for Ted, is actually partly due to the fact that she wasn't on screen a lot, and the fact that it was just these stories of her kind of allowing us to build the image of the perfect woman in our heads, or like Ted's perfect woman. And that actually could have been ruined in a sense if we did have more screen time with her. And maybe that sounds weird, but if you think about it, like the more time we actually saw of Ted and Tracy together, actually there's more time and more potential for things to happen where we could start judging Tracy. It was just briefly mentioned that Ted and Tracy get into fights. And if we as an audience were ever to see that, in a way, that would kind of ruin our perception that Tracy's the perfect woman for Ted. So in a way, by the show not showing us a lot of Tracy and a lot of their time together, it kind of helps us preserve that illusion that she is actually the perfect woman. I think that kind of makes sense, or hopefully it makes sense, as to why they wouldn't have given her more screen time in general. And as far as the abruptness of her death, like how quickly it was kind of brushed over, I know a lot of people, like, I'm not going to deny it would have been nice if they could elaborate on it. But again, thinking about it from the point of view where Ted is telling the story, it makes sense that he wouldn't need to elaborate to his kids about how the mother died. And yes, a lot of people kind of argue, that Ted is telling the story, but there's still a lot of things that they showed that he shouldn't have told his kids as part of his story. Most of them being like sex things. But even with that, I feel like there's a big difference between telling your kids something immature and telling your kids something that's just flat out painful. Like, they all lived through the mother's death. For Ted to have to elaborate that at all would have just brought up bad memories for them. So it kind of makes sense that he wouldn't talk about it. Like, just saying that's when she got sick, combined with the fact that we had all those hints in the past, I think they gave us those hints to kind of ease us into the fact that she was going to die. We wouldn't feel as bad when the death was kind of grazed over in the end. As we know by the way the show actually ended, Ted is kind of telling the story to come to terms with the fact that he's ready to move on. So kind of the overall theme of his story is supposed to be like positive and like deal with looking forward onto the future. So it makes sense that he wouldn't elaborate on something that would bring back bad memories, because it's supposed to be kind of an optimistic story he's telling his kids. So he wouldn't want to drag down that feeling with talking about the mother dying. So again, even though we would have liked to see more of Ted and Tracy together, like, I definitely understand, and it makes sense to me kind of the way that it actually all played out, especially given the ending that we actually got. And I also kind of think, and this is kind of just speculation in the way I see it, but I think the way that they played out the mother's death to kind of help us relate to Ted in a way that, Ted obviously wanted more time with her, and then the way that the mother kind of died suddenly kind of left the audience wanting more time with her also. Again, that's all like speculation. I don't know if the writers were actually trying to do that. But at the same time, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that they wouldn't try to kind of convey that feeling. Obviously, this show is pretty good at getting you to feel things. Now, after the mother died, I know a lot of people, again, like they said that they didn't mind what happened so much as how it happened. So they were kind of bothered by the fact that it went right from Tracy dying to the kids kind of being like, oh yeah, we'll go for Aunt Robin. And I mean, I get that. Like, if there was a way for him to kind of space that out a little better, then, that would have been cool too. But I don't think it was terrible the way that they did actually portray it. Because if you think about it, obviously they didn't spend a lot of time on screen with the whole situation. Like, it did happen kind of fast. But we know that it was 6 years that passed since Tracy died. So obviously, it's reasonable that the kids would want their dad to be happy. It's reasonable to think that, being at the age that they are, first of all, the mother died when they were, I think, if I remember this with the dates, the kids would have been like 7 and 9 when the mom passed. And then if 6 years passed, like at least for the youngest one, that's almost half their life. They went almost half their life not knowing their mother, kind of coming to terms with it, accepting it. I feel like it's very reasonable that by Ted telling this story, and then the kids end up picking up on the fact that the story was in fact based mostly around Robin, that they did a little detective work on their own. I thought that was kind of a cool little throwback to the Mosby boys. But yeah, they kind of figured out that the story was really about Robin. And it's not unreasonable, at least to me, that despite the fact that their mother did pass, that they would be excited that their dad has found a way that they think he can be happy. And he thinks he can be happy. So, while it was fast, the way we saw it, I still don't think it was an unreasonable reaction by the kids. Like, after 6 years, I think they've come to terms with what's happened, and I think they're ready to see their dad be happy again. So then that leaves us with Ted and Robin ending up together. It kind of goes back to the whole letting her go as opposed to giving up his feelings for her. If you watch the show, I feel like you would notice that there's always something between them. Like, obviously, it's very obvious in the first season. And I did go back, I just finished rewatching the first season. And surprisingly, I didn't remember this, but for the majority of the first season, it's actually Robin going after Ted. Like, I was surprised because I thought, you think about it, it's always like Ted going after Robin. But for the most part of the first season, it was Robin trying to deal with her feelings for Ted. And even though, yes, at multiple points, like, they said they were over each other and, like, they were ready to move on, if you just watch the way their characters were, at least for me, like, I never believed that they were actually over. I always felt like there was something there between them. Even up through the wedding, Ted goes through all that to get the locket. And then, of course, Robin has her little freak out. She says, why shouldn't I be with the guy who gets me my locket and the guy who gets me the blue French horn? And that's where he says, I'm not that guy anymore, which is true, because at that point, he has let her go, and he's actually the guy that's emotionally available to meet the mother. I don't think that means at all that he doesn't still have feelings for Robin, and I don't think at all that that was just a wedding freak out by her, because we know that Locket meant a lot to her. So again, like, just considering the whole season, not the whole season, the whole series, I just feel like there was always something. Like, no matter what happens, it always kind of came back to Ted and Robin, which, is what the kids pointed out at the end, and it is the way I always saw it too. So I think the fact that they ended up together, a lot of people are complaining that they spent so much time convincing us that they wouldn't work. But if you think about it, the reason they didn't work, which is what a lot of people have argued, were that when they first met, Robin didn't want a relationship. She wanted to focus on her career and travel, do that stuff. Ted wanted to settle down and have a family. And that's what they ended up doing. And yeah, people are upset, I guess they're upset, because now it's like Ted got his family. And the way they kind of interpreted it as, Ted got with the mother, got his family, then the mother died. Now Robin is back in New York. She's back in her old apartment with her dogs. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that she's done with the whole traveling thing. So she got to accomplish her goals. Ted got to accomplish his. So now they're at that point in time where it's actually right for them to be together. And again, like, people have thrown around the word regression. People see it as Ted going back to Robin. And again, like, just the way I've seen everything, I don't see it as Ted going back to Robin. I see it as Robin's always kind of meant something to him. And at this point in their lives, it's actually perfect that they would end up together. So, of course, if the mother didn't die, they wouldn't be together. I think that's worth pointing out. It's not like Ted had feelings for Robin throughout the whole thing. Like, when he was with the mother, I think it's pretty obvious the way he talks about her throughout the whole series that he loves her. And if she didn't die, like, they would have stayed together and been happy. But the fact that she's been gone for now 6 years, old feelings start to resurface. He, telling these stories to his kids, thinking back on things. And it would make sense that, feelings for Robin would kind of come up when she's been kind of just a constant in his life. I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I'm getting all this across. It's 6 a.m. right now, and I've yet to go to bed. So, kind of struggling a little bit. Hopefully, I'm not slurring my words or anything. Hopefully what I've actually explained does make sense. Again, if it doesn't, if there's anything you feel like needs clarifying, please leave a comment and ask me, and I'll definitely respond to it, because I feel like there's still things I forgot about. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I kind of talking for a while, and again, I hope that made sense. If you didn't agree with me, I totally understand that. If you saw things differently, I get it. That took me a lot of contemplating just to be able to make sense of all that. So, I could just be overanalyzing everything. But yeah, I think I'm going to go to sleep now. So thanks for watching, and see ya.